Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, and every dollar in your savings account is still there. Same number, same balance, nothing missing. But by the end of the day, that money buys half of what it bought that morning. Then imagine it happening again the next week, and then again after that. This isn't fiction. It happened to ordinary families in multiple countries throughout modern history. Different governments, different economies, same pattern. Tonight I'm going to walk you through 5 real countries where money printing spiraled out of control. What happened to ordinary people's savings? And the one pattern that appeared in every single case. First, let's simplify something that sounds complicated. What does printing money actually mean? In simple terms, when governments spend more money than they collect, central banks can increase the supply of money in the system. At first, it can even feel beneficial. Markets rise. Spending increases. People feel richer. But history shows something important. When too much money enters the system too quickly, the value of that money can begin falling. And when confidence weakens, prices can move fast. So tonight, we're looking at 5 countries, 5 different governments, 5 different decades, 5 different political systems. But despite all those differences, the same pattern kept repeating. And the final country on this list? That's the one most viewers are already thinking about. Let's start with the most famous example. Germany in the early 1920s. A schoolteacher named Friedrich spent 20 years saving money carefully. He did everything people are told to do, worked consistently, avoided reckless spending, saved for the future. At the beginning of 1921, his savings could buy a comfortable home. But by late 1923, those same savings could barely buy basic food. Not because he gambled. Not because he lost his job. Because inflation moved faster than ordinary people could react. Friedrich's story wasn't unique. Millions of families lived the same experience. At its peak, prices in Germany were doubling every few days, sometimes faster. People rushed to spend money immediately after getting paid because waiting even 1 week could mean losing enormous purchasing power. And here's the part historians still emphasize today. Many people didn't recognize how serious the situation was until it accelerated suddenly. But as dramatic as Weimar Germany was, what happened in Yugoslavia decades later became even faster. In the early 1990s, Yugoslavia experienced one of the worst inflation crises ever recorded. A factory worker named Mirko noticed something strange happening to his paycheck. By the time the weekend ended, his salary already bought noticeably less. People began rushing from banks directly to stores. Not out of panic at first, but because prices kept changing faster than wages could adjust. Businesses relabeled products constantly. Stores struggled to keep inventory priced correctly. And eventually, people stopped trusting the currency itself. At the peak of the crisis, prices were doubling in less than 2 days. The government introduced enormous banknotes worth billions. Those bills lost value too. What many survivors later said was simple. The people who accepted reality fastest, stopped waiting for stability to return, and adapted immediately, were the ones who protected the most. But now we move to the example that hit ordinary middle-class families the hardest emotionally. In Zimbabwe during the late 2000s, inflation became so extreme that numbers almost stopped feeling real. A nurse named Tendai spent years saving money for her children's future. Like millions of people, she trusted the banking system completely. Then inflation accelerated. And accelerated again. One morning, she checked her account and technically had trillions of dollars. But at the market, those trillions barely bought basic groceries. Zimbabwe eventually issued a $100 trillion banknote. Today it's one of the most famous symbols of hyperinflation ever created. But the deeper lesson wasn't about the size of the numbers. It was about trust. Because once people lost confidence in the currency, they started using alternatives instead. Foreign currencies, goods, direct trade. And once that shift happened, the inflation spiral became even harder to stop. We're halfway through. And the next two countries are the ones people debate the most. Because one of them is still dealing with inflation today. And the final country on this list may feel uncomfortably familiar. Venezuela was once one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America. It had enormous oil reserves, a growing middle class, and strong economic potential. A teacher named Sofia remembered when her salary comfortably covered groceries, rent, and savings. By 2018, Sofia was working 2 jobs and still falling behind. Not because she spent recklessly, because the numbers simply stopped making sense. Then inflation accelerated. Over time, everyday costs rose faster than wages. And eventually, ordinary professionals found themselves struggling to afford basics. That year, inflation reached levels that made long-term saving nearly impossible in the local currency. People adapted however they could. Some converted money into foreign currencies immediately after getting paid. Others traded directly through goods and services. And economists still debate exactly which policy mistakes caused the collapse to accelerate so dramatically. But one thing almost everyone agrees on is this. Once confidence in the currency weakened badly enough, the damage spread through every part of daily life. And now we arrive at the final example. The one most viewers probably care about the most. Now, to be clear before we continue, the United States is not experiencing Weimar Germany-style hyperinflation. The situations are very different. But economists still study patterns carefully. And over the last several years, economists and investors alike have been watching one thing very closely: the rapid expansion of money supply during and after the pandemic era. Between 2020 and 2022, the US money supply increased at one of the fastest rates in modern history. At the same time, inflation surged across housing, food, transportation, and everyday essentials. And for many families, something subtle happened. Even though their bank balance looked similar, their purchasing power declined. $100,000 simply bought less than it did a few years earlier. Now economists disagree about how dangerous this is, how temporary it is, and whether inflation can fully stabilize long term. But history shows that prolonged inflation creates pressure everywhere. On savings, on wages, and on public trust. And that's why so many people are paying closer attention now than they did a decade ago. So what connects all 5 of these stories? Different countries, different cultures, different governments. But the same emotional pattern appeared every single time. At first, people believed the instability was temporary. Then prices rose gradually. Then suddenly. And in almost every case, the people hurt most were not reckless investors. They were ordinary savers who trusted stability would return quickly. History also shows something else. The people who adapted early were not necessarily smarter or richer. They simply asked difficult questions earlier than everyone else. So what do people historically wish they had done earlier? First, diversifying beyond a single currency system. Second, owning assets or skills that retain practical value during inflationary periods. And third, paying attention to economic signals before panic became obvious. Now let me be clear. This video is not predicting imminent collapse. And it's not financial advice. Economic systems are extremely complex, and history never repeats perfectly. But history does leave patterns. And understanding those patterns matters. Because Friedrich in Germany, Mirko in Yugoslavia, Tenai in Zimbabwe, Sofia in Venezuela, and millions of ordinary Americans in 2022 all believed severe monetary instability was something that happened somewhere else. Until suddenly, it didn't. If this video changed the way you think about money, inflation, or savings, subscribe. Because in the next video, we're looking at the exact moves people made in the months before each of these crises accelerated. Not theory. Real decisions. Real timing. Subscribe my channel, because that breakdown is coming next. And if this video made you think, that one will make you prepare.